Spacefare. Welcome to WTUFO. I'm Caleb Mayo. Hope you're enjoying watching or listening. You can support the show now on YouTube or Patreon or Buzzsprout. All three places, Patreon, YouTube, and Buzzsprout, will let you become a subscribing member of WTUFO. You can support us for as little or as much per month as you would like. There might be a couple perks, but the basic idea is you can just help us continue to make the show. This would mean an absolute ton to us. I hope you're enjoying the show. We're having a blast talking to these brilliant people and doing deep dives about the scientific revolution unfolding around UFOs. We're also really enjoying your comments on YouTube and X, so please keep engaging. Tell us more about what you'd like to see or what your ideas about the phenomenon are, and please support us on either Patreon or YouTube or Buzzsprout. Hope you enjoy the episode. Have a great day. What the UFO? I'm here with Dr. Michael Bohlander. Michael, it's great to meet you. Thank you for joining me.
Thank you for having me.
Dr. Bohlander is chair in global law and SETI policy at Durham University. Originally, he was an international criminal lawyer, and his current research focuses on the consequences of contact with extraterrestrial intelligence for human law, particularly humanitarian and human rights law. I'm pulling that from the back of your excellent book, Extraterrestrial Intelligence and Human Law. Does that sound right as a summary of your current professional situation?
That's right, yes.
Okay, cool. So shout out to this book, Extraterrestrial Intelligence and Human Law, which we're going to abbreviate to ETI for our conversation for extraterrestrial intelligence. I just want to say thank you. It's an excellent work. It's creative, it's sharp, it's even fun, but it's deeply sourced. It's really thoughtful. I pulled like 100 interesting trailheads out of there for things to read in the future and people to reach out to. So thank you so much for writing this.
Not at all.
For the bulk of our interview, I'd like to kind of do three parts, like a little bit of a preamble, and then we'll kind of walk people through the book because it's a little bit hard to access, and then we'll do some response stuff after that. But as a way in, would you like to just tell us a little bit about your career and your current work?
Yeah, so as you said, I'm a lawyer. I was trained in Germany. My first job, because Germany has a career judiciary, was on the German bench in East Germany after unifications, where I was a civil and criminal judge for about 13 years. And during that time, I spent 2 years at the International Criminal Tribunal for Yugoslavia as a legal officer. And then when I came back, I decided after a few years that I wanted to join academia because I'd always kind of done academic research on the side apart from being on the bench. So in Germany, it's quite normal that judges engage in academic work. And so in 2003, I applied to Durham University, and they were stupid enough to hire me. So and then I've been there since 2004, and in 2014. The opportunity came up to go to the extraordinary chambers in the courts of Cambodia, or the ECCC, which is the war crimes tribunal for the Khmer Rouge, the Red Khmer, who ruled the country from 1975 to 79. And so my German government proposed me to the UN. The UN proposed me to the Cambodian government, and at the end of the day, I got appointed by the king. So I spent about 4 years there in Cambodia. Wonderful time, wonderful country, wonderful people. During that time, I was also elected to the Kosovo Specialist Chambers, which is a court dealing with crimes committed in Kosovo, and which sits in The Hague. So I was on that bench on a roster there for about 5 years. So the UN didn't allow me to actually work on that court while I was still under contract with the Cambodian court, which was reasonable. And then in 2022, I resigned from that court for health reasons and for reasons of workload. So I'm still formally on the ECCC as a co-investigating judge, but I don't have any work anymore. They don't pay me anymore. So and that's where I'm now, more or less. And in 2020, I started having this interest in SETI first, which then kind of morphed into an additional interest in UAP matters. I think that's enough for an introduction.
That sounds great. And that led you to investigate and then ultimately write this book. It looks like you wrote a few papers on your way into this book?
Yes, there are two papers. Two chapters of the book are actually modified versions of previous articles. So I cheated a little bit when I wrote that book, but all above board. So the first paper I looked at dealt with the idea of meta law. And what I would say in that paper and also in the book is that I'm not really a great fan of this idea of meta law, because we don't have anybody for the conversation. We're only talking to ourselves. If we try to be not anthropocentric, but we can't, because that's how we are hardwired. We cannot think like another entity that is not human.
And to flag this for people who aren't familiar, meta law is this idea that we could build a universal set of principles.
That's right. Yeah,
that could potentially govern all kinds of beings.
Yeah, a cosmic law that applies between species or civilizations. And there have been people like Fazan, was most famously trying to build a meta law on the basis of categorical imperative, which just doesn't work in my view. So as I say, I'm not a big fan of that idea. And then the other one was entitled "The Galactic Club," after a book, a previous author. My question was, if we were ever offered membership of an intergalactic network, and they had a certain rule book for joining the club, would we want to? And if that rule book somehow clashed with our basic values, would we be willing to trade any of those if it meant kind of getting the technology that would solve Earth's problems in 10 years, maybe? Or would we not?
Thank you for explaining those. I think we'll get to one of my favorite parts of your book here toward the end of the conversation about the book, where you ask that question and answer it in some detail about what parts of our principles we might be willing to bend and what is non-negotiable. So I just wanted to ask about the book. This is basically an academic work. So this is like, it's, in America, it's like $170, $150, something like that. Yeah. So people aren't just going to pick it up casually. But would they be able to find it at like academic libraries, or maybe even ask their like local libraries to pick it up, do you think?
Well, that's a question of the budget of your local library, really. I mean, okay. I know the book is terribly expensive, but that's the publisher. It's got nothing to do with me. So if it was up to me, it would be $20, and then many more people would buy it. Yeah. But so that's not something I have influence on. I have seen that when you vanity Google yourself from time to time, and you see your book, then you see it's listed in a number of university libraries. So I think university libraries actually carry it, or maybe the ebook. So I'm a little bit doubtful whether your local community library would stock it, because it's just too expensive.
Yeah, that makes sense. There might be some library sharing resources that could get it to you. But if you're listening to this and wondering how to check it out, again, it's called Extraterrestrial Intelligence and Human Law. And if you're a student right now, you might be able to find it at your academic library or have them source it for you. And then you could ask your local library. But we're going to take you through the general structure of this book, if that works for you, Michael.
Sure.
And I figured, by way of easing us into this, I would ask you the most obvious, like, kind of big picture question, which is, why do you think it's important to consider global, legal, and military questions before we have any potential confirmation of ETI presence?
Well, it's just, it's good precautionary reasoning, because if something like that ever were to happen, I mean, leaving the entire UAP issue outside, because that means it might already have happened. If that ever happened in the sense of an alien species arriving from outer space, you would want to be prepared. It's not something that is completely out of the question. If you look at the more recent research, for example, on exoplanets, there are now, I think, anything from upwards of 5,000 already confirmed exoplanets. I don't know how many of those have habitable conditions, but we're finding more and more as we go along with telescopes like the James Webb, and so we're going to see more and more. SETI, proper astronomical SETI, is looking for biosignature or technosignatures, i.e. indications in the atmosphere of planets that might give you an indication that there are molecules there that are indicative of life, or even of some sort of industrial civilization or what have you. So far, as far as public record is concerned, they haven't found anything. So, and it's just, if anything of that sort were to happen, you would want to be prepared as a species, and not just as a number of spacefaring countries that are also militarily well positioned. So, of course, the US or China or Russia, maybe India, they're all spacefaring. They're all military civilizations as well. So they might think that there's an ad hoc way of dealing with that kind of threat. You always see it in these science fiction movies where everybody comes together despite their previous differences, and they all kind of then deal with the aliens. So that's the one thing, is if the contact was to be hostile, which we don't know. There's loads and loads of thinking going on about whether that's likely or not. I think it's wishful thinking to say it will never be hostile. It will always be benign. And the other question is, what if the contact is not hostile? So you have people arriving on Earth, which are kind of well dispositioned towards us, but they have, and that's what we'll get into later on, I think, in the interview, they have ideas that don't match ours. And so how do you deal with a totally different mindset in order to bring about some sort of agreement on how to proceed with the relationship? So that's why you want to know in advance. Just be prepared. The Scouts motto, be prepared.
I'm convinced. So you mentioned at the beginning of this book, you call it the elephant in the room, yes. UFOs. You are not a ufologist, and because of that, we're not going to go too deep into UFOs. We're going to circle back a little bit to UAP at the end here, but for the most part, we're going to talk about this idea of just preparing to engage with ETI. We're not going to try to answer the question, but my understanding of your feeling about UAP is that we don't know for sure what they are. We can't say for sure that they're ETI, but we also haven't ruled that out. Does that summarize your position about right?
Yeah, I mean, first off, just to make clear, I'm not an experiencer and so-called experiencer. I've never seen a UFO. I've never had any visit from any kind of non-human entities. So I proceed from a statistical point of view. So as far as SETI is concerned, we just talked about that. Anything from outer space, I think statistically, it's unimaginable that we are alone. The only question is how many are there and how far away are they, and can they actually come and visit us given the interstellar distances and propulsion, whatever. The other thing on UAP, I have come down from the fence in that sense that I'm here. I also call myself a statistical believer that there's too much out there that shows that there is something flying around in our airspace, or maybe in orbit or whatever. And from what you hear, when you listen to people like Alex Dietrich, there's this fighter pilot, she's very factual about it, but she just describes there was an object that did things that human technology can't reproduce. So and it's not the only one, the tic-tac object. There are other issues, and there are sightings by normal people, and there are just too many. So even if you discount 99.9% of them as hoaxes or false positives, there's still enough out there that says that there is something. As you say, what it is, we don't know. But whether it's interdimensional, whether it's extratemporal, it's us from the future. Some people seem to think that, but whether it is actually extraterrestrial, I think all three of those would be extraordinary. So, in that sense, I think there is something there, but what it is, of course, I don't know.
Agree. I think we won't dwell too far on this this skepticism, but we have to note that a fair amount of the scientific community is still kind of either ignoring this subject or deeply skeptical about it. And so I thought I might ask you to talk a little bit about what you see as the flaws with the classic Carl Sagan extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence rule, and potentially you could pair that with your thinking about the difference between scientific and judicial standards.
Right. So that's two different things. So the
okay. All right. Well,
we can do it in one after the other.
Okay.
So the ECRI rule, extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence, is just in one of my later papers on alien counter narratives in judicial proceedings. I've spent some time explaining that this is a completely arbitrary principle. It seems to say that certain facts, when you talk about extraordinary claims, it means you're putting forward extraordinary facts. There is no such thing as extraordinary facts. A fact is a fact. And the question is, have we experienced something like that before? Yeah, is it something which is in the kind of the armory of our experiential history? But that novelty as such is not a criterion for deciding whether something is valid or not. So if you just think back, for example, to the times of Christopher Columbus when he arrived in the Americas, and you have people from the native tribes watching these big ships arriving in the bay, and then people with metal hats and sticks that spew fire coming off the ships. That is just a fact. The only thing which is extraordinary is that they never saw it before. So and the accurate fact is it's not actually Sagan. It's an Italian philosopher. Actually, I think Truzzi was his name. He is the one who actually coined this phrase in the first place. So what normally goes along with the accuracy is a restriction of the allowable evidence, which in the context of Sagan and SETI is always instrumental, astronomical, if possible, repeatable. Through instrumental assemblies. And that's just the thing which I find there's no logical reason to restrict it to that. It's something which, as you said before, has to do with the attitude of scientists towards anything they cannot measure. And especially in the context of UAP research, wherein we all know that some of these objects have been measured by radar and other instruments. It is something. It's a thing which is has the potential to wreck careers. That's what's behind it. And if you're a SETI astronomer, of some standing, you probably have a number of rather healthy grounds. And if you get the reputation of being a lunatic, then grounds disappear. So that's one aspect. But looking at the question of what is permissible evidence, we then move towards those different standards of evidence from scientific and judicial. And the judicial standard, and not just the judicial standard, is the everyday standard that we apply when we interact as human beings. It's that we know some people are believable, they are honest, they've never told a lie in their lives. And when you talk to them, you know they're going to serve you with the truth. And on the other hand, you know there are people who are the exact opposite. And we build our entire social interaction on this. So if we always wanted to have some sort of instrumental proof of what everybody tells us, we'd never get anywhere. So that is where this judicial aspect comes in, or if you want to call it a social aspect, is if you have, and that's my favorite example. When I was a criminal judge, I sat on quite a number of rape cases where there was only one witness, and that was the victim. There was nobody else present. And as you know, sometimes women find it very difficult to actually not shower immediately afterwards when something like that has happened. So from a criminal justice point of view, they're destroying the evidence. Yeah, so there are no liquids or anything present. So you only have the word of the victim against that of the defendant, and most of the time the defense is, well, yeah, it happened, but it was consensual. And then you have to listen to the victim, and that's why in such cases they shouldn't actually be the first one on your list when you get into the judiciary. So you need to have some kind of understanding of human nature, but it works the same way. We have to trust or not trust what people say, and we have over the centuries or millennia developed ways of kind of intuitively understanding when somebody is not telling the truth. I mean, it's not hard and fast, of course. It's not the same as with an instrument. But even with an instrument, it depends on how finely tuned that instrument is that you may actually miss things. That if
you're talking about like a sensor here, like a radar.
Exactly, yeah. So if you had a better sensor, then you might actually pick something up which your kind of primitive sensor can't, but it's still there. So it's the instrumental approach doesn't actually, it's not error-free either. So, and I think that all these narratives you have from starting from people just seeing a UFO, to people having interactions with entities, to the really, really problematic issue of abductions, all of those are covered under our social history of our history of social interaction, and they cannot be reproduced. So insisting on some sort of instrumental approach is pointless, and it's neglecting a large part of what we are as humans.
Leslie Kean has a really beautiful formation that an extraordinary phenomenon deserves an extraordinary investigation, which I think is a good answer to this ACRE problem. Because if you're getting this human evidence in the form of reporting from hundreds of thousands of people, then it's a little weird, honestly, to just say, well, because it's not on sensors, I'm not going to allocate any funding to the research of this subject.
Absolutely.
So I think the broad point that I'm taking from you there is that by judicial standards, UAP are significantly more obviously interesting than they are so far by scientific. Does that sound about right?
It's not a question, I think, of whether they're more interesting. It's as I'm trying to say, we have this social interaction standard where we can tell that people are sincere or not, and a judicial standard is a heightened standard of that. So it's when you deal with a case, it's not just enough that somebody tells you something, and you just believe it. So if you can, you have to find corroborating evidence. If you can, you have to have scientific evidence. For example, semen that was found on the victim, which is being kind of then DNA sequenced, and we can find out who it belongs to, fingerprints, all that stuff. If you have it, you have to use it. So you can't just believe it. But the fact is that we have a framework which is geared towards making sure that we have the highest protection of the truth, combined with the highest protection of the defendant not being railroaded into jail. And if a story matches those standards, which leads a judge or a jury to decide beyond reasonable doubt that this is what happened, then we actually place quite severe consequences on it. So if you find somebody guilty of rape, in some countries it may mean a lifelong imprisonment, or for murder or whatever. In some countries it may mean the death penalty. And so the consequences are much more serious than the consequences in our academic debate on whether kind of social narratives or instrumental evidence are better. That nothing turns on that. But the other thing, believing people what they tell you, if what they tell you constitutes a crime, leads to somebody else spending a long time in prison or worse. So I think it's and that's my idea behind this alien counter narratives in judicial proceedings. There are rules of evidence which can actually force a court to make a ruling on whether they believe there is something to be looked at. It doesn't mean we can force a court to accept there are UAPs. But I did that study on the basis of the German criminal and civil procedure models, and there are constellations where you end up forcing the judges to make a statement, and not just saying, "Well, everybody knows they don't exist." You have to make them; they have to make a statement. And just one example where it comes really interesting from a procedural point of view is if you have the one example that I'm using there is a car crash which is caused by one driver being overflown by a UFO at very low height, and he just kind of swerves and crashes in the other car. And so normally the response by the defense or by the plaintiff is, of course, there was no UFO, whatever it is, it's all rubbish. But there is a way that, if in civil procedure you have a duty of truth. So if the other party also saw the UFO, they would actually have to admit that. And if a party admits, if the other side admits, yes, I saw the UFO as well, but that doesn't help him, that's no difference from having a wasp in the car. And those are cases which have been decided whether a wasp in the car kind of gives you a reflex reaction and gets you off the hook. So it's no different from that. But yes, I saw the UFO as well. And this admission forces the court to accept that as a fact. Unless the court says it is general knowledge that UFOs do not exist, which obviously these days you can't say anymore. You can't say nothing like a UAP exists. What they are, no idea. But there are ways of getting a court to make a statement on, and that's what I find interesting. But it's not just us talking about people telling these narratives to organizations who kind of take statements and then nothing happens really. But here you could actually have a serious consequence.
That is a really interesting idea. And I love thinking about those two different systems of the law and science and how they interact and how they differ. One more question from your preamble. You say that the limited evidence that we have doesn't give us reason to believe that the UFOs are, if they are ETI, are necessarily benign or altruistic, or that other ETI would be in the future. Can you explain a bit about your thinking here?
Well, that's against the background that most people say if they are ETI, they are highly, I mean, from what we can see from their capabilities, they look like they have a very advanced technology. So advanced technology means they've been around for a while. And then if they are also able to travel interstellar distances, that means they must have crossed the so-called great filter when civilizations, that's the argument, tend to destroy themselves, as we are now at the moment in the best position to do. So destroying the planet, climate changes and having major powers going at each other's throat. So the argument is always that if they actually have that kind of level of advancement, then they must have surpassed their baser instincts and their aggressions. And I just don't see any evidence. When we look at ourselves, we've been developing for thousands of years, and the one thing which we develop best so far still are weapons. Any kind of thing that we can use to hurt somebody else. We're still very good at that. We're also good in other things, but that's one thing where we're really, really good. And if you look at, and that brings us to humanitarian law, we've had a number of conventions for decades now, some of them even over 100 years, that deal with how you should behave in warfare. Kind of making sure you limit the damage, because at some stage the war will end and you have to live with each other. That's what all these conventions are ultimately for. If you look what's happening in the world at the moment, it's not like we were taking that seriously. So that's a promise on paper, but it's more honored by in the breach than in actual actually following that. So what I'm saying is that this idea that the more advanced you become, the more you leave behind your baser instincts. I haven't seen any evidence for that in our own history. So I can't see any evidence in other civilizations either. And the thing is, even if you've surpassed aggression in your own species, in your own civilization, that doesn't necessarily mean that you're not aggressive towards others. So if your civilization is one which has an urge to colonize, surrounding space, and it will meet other civilizations who may not exactly want to be included in the colonization effort, and you may have to have a way of overcoming resistance, and that brings you back to aggression. So I'm not completely convinced by that idea. What was the other thing you said?
Well, something that bounced interestingly for me in there was that warfare has led both to technological development and actually to legal development in humans.
Yes, that's right.
That was intriguing. So I thought now we could move through the bulk of your book, and just to give people a little structure going into it, there are, I think, seven. There are 7 big chunks to this.
Yeah.
So I'm just going to lay those out so people have kind of a sense of the roadmap here. We've got the science of SETI, then the social aspects of SETI, then science fiction, then hostile contact and international and domestic law as it currently exists, then preparing for hostile contact, and eventually legal prolegomena of peaceful relationships with ETI, and that'll make 7 if you count what we just did as 1 with the introduction. Also, want to just quickly say I learned the word prolegomena from reading your book, so that'll probably be new to many listeners.
It's one which I had to learn when I was at university, because my doctoral supervisor had a tendency to use big words.
There's a lot of Latin in this book as well.
Well, that's German. Germans have a lot of, we use a lot of Latin legal terms, which people in the UK have been dropping for quite a while now.
Oh, interesting.
But it's still it's part of our DNA.
I learned nullum crimen, in limine, ius cogens. Sorry, that one, is that applying to all? Is that ius cogens?
No, that's compulsory law.
Compulsory law. Okay. Yeah. Erga omnes is maybe.
That's the other one. Yeah.
That's applying.
Applies among all.
Fascinating. Okay, so sorry, that was even a side note from prolegomena, which I think means sort of like an introductory exploration of a subject from a legal perspective. Does that sound right?
Well, generally, from philosophy could be anything. It's just kind of preparatory work in a way.
Okay, cool. So let's start with the science of SETI and just ask, what is the state of SETI research as you understand it currently?
Yeah, well, as we said previously before, there are different strands now, and it started out with this kind of radio wave research, some optical research, and now it's of course the sensors that they have are much more advanced, so they can now look for chemical composition of atmospheres and other things. So that's the big thing now, is looking for technosignatures and biosignature, and then in the context of the technosignatures, there's this kind of a topic of Dyson spheres. A Dyson sphere is meant to be something which is a huge mega construction or mega structure that has been built by a highly advanced civilization around there as the star of their home system, or any kind of star, so they can basically harness all the energy that star gives off, or most of it. The name Dyson comes from the person who actually had the idea. It's called Dyson. That's also, there are of course a number of physical issues around there. I'm not a physicist, so I don't even want to go there. But it would give off some sort of particular signature of energy. So that's what people are looking at. And most recently, I think 1 or 2 years ago, there was a paper I saw that they had kind of 7 candidates where that might actually be the case. But I think it then turned out that none of them are confirmed so far. So that's ongoing. So far, I have not seen any result from classical SETI that they actually found anything.
Just want to share there, because you mentioned Dyson spheres. One of the science fiction thinkers that I like, well, he's not really. He's a physicist, an astrophysicist who likes science fiction. His name is Isaac Arthur, and he made, I thought, a pretty good point about Dyson spheres, which is that what you'd want to be looking for is a phenomenon that emerges over the history of the universe. So as you go back, in older images should have fewer of these signatures, and more recent images should have more of whatever these things are. And his take is we don't have great candidates for this. He thought, to the extent there might be one, it's maybe the phenomena of quasars. But I think I get the idea that he is not particularly impressed by this evidence so far. So it could be that Dyson spheres are kind of the wrong tree to bark up, so to speak, or it could be that we just don't know how to look for them.
Yeah.
And you make the point in this book, and others have, that the scale of SETI research so far compared to the scope of the universe is infinitesimal. It's like having examined a glass of water from the ocean. Does that sound right?
Yeah, I think probably. I'm not fully aware of how many percent of the sky we actually looked at, but there is this new telescope. I think Vera Rubin. That is now proceeding on a kind of a very mechanical a process of scanning the sky. I think once every few days, or once every. So that will then, over time, when you have enough of these recordings and will over time probably allow you to have a look at what you just mentioned, that is anything really changing there? I mean, and Beatrice Villarreal from Sweden, she is working on the Vasco project, so vanishing and appearing sources from a century of observation. So she's doing exactly what she said. She's going back to through about 100 years of these photo plates and trying to find out whether anything really changed in the same area of space. So, and as I said, I'm not into the science of it all, but Beatrice will be at our symposium in 3 weeks, so she's going to talk about that research she's doing there.
Oh, that's great. What is your symposium? Is it Durham is holding this?
Yes, it's I'm organizing that in the law school. It's called Grounding the SETI and UAP Debate. So we have people from the States, from China, from Germany, France, the UK, obviously, and there's people who talk about SETI and people who talk about UAP, and just trying to get all of that to a grounded debate. That that there are certain criteria that we need to kind of all agree upon, which makes this rigorous academic research, and apply it to SETI. You apply it. It's probably more relevant to UAP research at this time, that we're actually doing this in an academically rigorous manner, and to get around this. In the meantime, has become facile, this disclosure debate. I know whether you want to touch on that later on, but to get around all that stuff, where you really can't trust the sources, and do your own research, and then it has to be academically rigorous. So that's what this symposium is about. If you're interested, I can send you the link afterwards.
I would love that. Thank you so much. And actually, that transitions nicely into my last question in the SETI science section, which is, do you have any ideas about what might account for the tension between the SETI and the UAP community? It seems a little odd sometimes from the outside that the people looking for signals of extraterrestrial intelligence would be so dismissive of UAP research, but they have been historically.
That's exactly my point. So there is a kind of a subcategory of SETI, which is called SETA, Search for Extraterrestrial Artifacts. And what, if not artifacts, are UAP? If you proceed on the premise that they are extraterrestrial, which so far we have no firm proof of that. But if you proceed on the premise that they might be, then I would think it falls squarely under SETA. And I think the only reason is what I said before, is that people are afraid of reputational damage. You see, there are a lot of nutcases out there in UAP research, and there's a lot of so-called whistleblowing going on, where at the end of the day, all that you hear is hearsay evidence. As a lawyer, I just call it hearsay evidence. When I see these people in the congressional hearings, they say, well, I can't talk about it because it's classified. But this is what happens when we have reverse engineered and we have live bodies and what have you. So it's all hearsay. You never got to see the evidence. So that there's all this almost like a big circus about the whole thing. And that doesn't really get us any further. So I think we really need to come to a point where UAP is seen as equally worthy of serious research as SETI. Just remember when SETI started, people thought they were crazy. They've only recently arrived in some sort of area where it's seen as kind of serious scientific research. And the same needs to happen with UAP. And of course, there's much more work to be done, because, as I said, there are lots of people out there who are just milking the phenomenon for their own purposes.
I think that's a powerful part of the problem, the fringe nature of the work to begin with. I think sometimes about I engage with like sort of the counterintuitive, skeptical, contrarian side of the intellectual universe. And they're also very hesitant to engage with UAP. And sometimes I think it might be because they're already on what you could call the fringe of discourse. And they don't want to take on another subject that would make them even easier to exile.
Yeah, I mean, just if I can just add on that, I mean, what is the implication of assuming that you have, let's say, a non-human intelligence on the planet that is running rings around us technologically? all of a sudden we're no longer the dominant species. And that's one thing which I think is hardwired into our brains, that we don't want to be in that position, that we're not top dog on the planet. So I think that there is, Andreas Anton and Michael Schetscher in their book on exosociology, called Meeting the Alien, they've made that point that there is a lot of people are afraid of finding the answer. And so they keep searching and searching, but they don't actually want to find anything, because the consequence would be literally earth-shattering for humanity to find out we're not number one on this planet, leave alone in the universe.
Yeah, it's kind of frustrating to imagine that might stop our intellectual pursuits, but it's rational to expect that it could, unfortunately. Mm-hmm. So let's move to the SETI social aspects. Would you like to describe the efforts that have been made so far by the SETI community to kind of like organize their thinking? Like, I'm thinking about the IAA SETI declaration.
Right.
Or we could maybe talk about some of the scales. I don't know. The Rio scale, just to mention for people, is something people have designed to like gauge how serious a SETI event might be. I don't think we need to get into this too deeply, but maybe you could tell us a little bit about like this state of preparation in the SETI community. I've been especially surprised to see that there's really not much international agreement around particularly METI, but even the which is messaging extraterrestrial intelligence, but even the like SETI protocols for how to respond to finding something. That's something that scientists have basically been left to their own devices to figure out. Is that right? Or has there been more international organization than I'm describing?
No, you're right. I think the driving force in the SETI area is the IAA SETI permanent committees, the IAA International Academy of Astronautics, and they have a permanent committee that deals with SETI, so the IAA SETI committee, and they've been the driving force on that for decades. But as you say, apart from one set of the protocol on getting a signals, the SETI declaration, the original one, nothing else has actually been approved by the entire IAA. So there are reply protocols that they haven't been approved. So the SETI declaration has a which at least has been approved by the IAA, and as I'm being told by a colleague who works in the European Space Agency, would probably also be followed by the ESA if there was ever a contact event with a signal.
That's the European Space Agency.
European Space Agency, exactly. So, but that's where we are. So it's not legally binding. It is a document which the IAA SETI has given itself, and which has been adopted by as the correct way to go about it by probably most SETI researchers. That when you get a signal, there's a certain way who do you have to inform you, but so again, that's not binding. So nobody is bound by that. And if one of the spacefaring nations said, well, if we get a signal, we're not going to tell anybody, and we're going to try and contact these aliens and see what happens, and whether you get some benefit from that. And some people in the UAP community and in the whistleblowing corner have said exactly that. And so, as I said, there isn't anything by way of legally binding documents on METI in particular. The same applies. I find METI personally, I find an utterly reckless endeavor, because by its self-professed aim is to create a situation which humanity can't control. So if you're serious about messaging to an extraterrestrial civilization with the idea that they might be much more advanced than we are, and so far not know where we are, and then they come, if you look at even science fiction movies like Battleship, things like that, I mean, it's exactly the thing that happens when scientists play God. So I'm deeply critical of the whole idea, but it doesn't matter because it's been happening since the 1970s, the Arecibo signal and all of that. So it's scientists they have this. I always think back what these people must have been in as children, So they got a kind of chemistry set, and it just said, well, I wonder what would happen if I pulled those two things together, and it goes boom.
Yeah.
And that's what it's like the magician's apprentice in this story. You just do it because you can. You don't think about the ethics, about the consequences. And METI is one of those things, which I'm deeply critical of. But I haven't heard in recent years that there has been kind of a major METI attempt. But if you could count this one of the breakthrough initiatives, the Starshot, which is sending mini probes with solar sails out into outer space in the direction of Alpha Centauri. I think that's the first one they want to do. So you basically sending them a probe, which if they're half intelligent, they can track the trajectory, and then if they have light speed travel, then 4 years later they knock on our door. So it's but on METI, I haven't seen that much. I'm sure it's still going on because you just can't stop these people. So that on that sense, and if you look at UN institutions, for example, there's nothing there. You have COPOS, which is the Committee on Peaceful Use of Outer Space, and ANUSA, the United Nations Office of Outer Space Affairs. They're dealing with kind of the normal spacefaring stuff of humans. You have the Outer Space Treaty, which has a few provisions, and all the other ones like the Moon Agreement and all that, provisions that have a clause that if something happens or is witnessed by astronauts that might cause a risk or a danger to human space travel, then they should report that. So you could, and that was never in the mind of the people when they drafted that, to actually say, well, there's something coming which is not us. But that might be one of the cases where you could actually say that's covered by one of these treaties. But it was unintentional, if at all. So I don't see anything by way of development. If you're moving a little bit into the UAP area again, there was a recent initiative with the European Commission by the Portuguese member of European Parliament, Guerreiro, who wanted at least to get the EU to create a joint central authority where people could actually report sightings or things like that. So you actually get a Europe-wide database instead of having one in this country, one in that country, and then that use different criteria, what have you. And it didn't happen. So it may be just because it was UAP and not SETI, I don't know. But it's a reasonable thing to ask for. But even that doesn't happen. So from an official point of view, as far as I'm aware, and you always have to remember we're talking public record here. I don't know what's going on behind the scenes.
Sure.
Just like this entire disclosure debate, we don't know what's really going on. I haven't seen anything that would move really kind of decisively into a direction that the whole thing is being taken more seriously.
Thank you for taking us to the UN. If there were a committee at the UN that were making rules about this, do you have an idea of who that would be? Like what organization within the United Nations should be in front of this?
As I just said, there are two. There's the United Nations Office of Outer Space Affairs, which is dealing with the Outer Space Treaty stuff.
The Office of Outer Space Affairs. Okay.
And then in there, there's this committee on peaceful use of outer space, because as you know, the current regulations that we have on the use of space prohibit, so to speak, arming the heavens. So military uses of outer space are discouraged. In certain contexts, it's not everything is discouraged, but for example, putting nuclear weapons into orbit or a military station on the moon or things like that. Those would kind of probably attract some sort of legal opprobrium, but not everything is prohibited. And yes, we all know it's prohibiting something and people actually not doing it are two different things.
And we'll circle back to this when we do defending the Earth, but just to spoil that briefly, you've suggested that we might need to change some of those rules if we're going to try to defend our planet. Like we're currently, if we can't militarize space, well, that's a rule against defending ourselves.
Yeah, in a sense, if we're taking planetary defense seriously, planetary defense at the moment means defense against asteroids, near Earth objects, and all that kind of stuff.
Mm-hmm.
So it's not meant as defense in a military sense. But if we are taking the idea of contact from outer space and a kind of direct contact, not just a signal, if we're taking that serious as a potential event, then we should prepare ourselves, and then planetary defense acquires a separate meaning. But you may actually have to put satellites, maybe not in Earth orbit, but beyond Moon orbit. The whole thing is and that's what I look at in one of the other chapters. Is the whole thing is you're being open to attack from a three-dimensional space. It's not like on Earth where it may come from the front, the left, or the right, but it can come from everywhere. So you basically have to kind of a spherical idea of a defense perimeter.
Which is really, really hard. And then the farther away from the planet you get, the worse the problems get with regard to time and resources.
Right.
But just to keep us in SETI for a quick second, if I just wanted to ask, because I think my understanding is that we really don't have international rules about this. Like we don't have some international treaty that says here's how we would handle it if we were going to meet ETI, and here's how we should prepare. And so as a result, I think this question is obvious. I was going to ask if the U.S. has made contact, like if there's been some secret military engagement with these beings, with some kind of beings or something. Would the United States military currently be in breach of any international agreement? And I think the answer is no, because there isn't any international agreement.
No. I mean, the question is the really basic question is, do the rules we have at the moment, which apply only to humans, between humans, would we apply those to non-humans? Yeah, it's not a given that we say, well, there's just people saying aliens should have been given the status of ambassadors. Why? Yeah, if they intrude our airspace without us asking them in, I would see that as an incursion rather than as a diplomatic overture. So that's all kind of in my way loose talk to equate them immediately to humans, and they may actually not want to be equated to us. And if they are. As we may actually see in the UAP context, if they are technologically more advanced, it's not us who makes the conditions, it's them. So all of that is, we're speculating on a very, very high level there. But you're right, in principle, there is no rule at the moment, other than if we apply our humanitarian law to aliens, then of course, if you keep them detained without trial, things like that, you might be in breach. But again, it's nobody will care, and the aliens, if they're actually at the level that we can dictate what to do, they would not know what their rights are, and they would not be able to contact a lawyer. So the practicality of the whole thing basically precludes any real legal considerations on it, because it just wouldn't happen.
I think at the end we should maybe wrap up with some view of what you think we should do in terms of international organization and maybe individual state organizations. But I'll shelve that question for right now and move into some scientific first contact scenarios. Now, I'll also flag that this is going a little more slowly than I had anticipated, but of course it is. I should have known that. So I'll try to keep us a little bit brisk here for the back of the book. I wanted to kick us off with sci-fi by noting that you mentioned that reading Cixin Liu's Dark Forest specifically, which is the second of the three-body trilogy series, may have inspired this work. I'm a big fan of this series. I think it's fantastic literature and people should read it, whether they're sci-fi heads or not. But is that accurate? First of all, did the Dark Forest theory inspire you to write this book?
I think I say so in the introduction to the book that's what triggered it. So it's not like that's not the first book on an invasion by an alien species. I don't know what it was at the time when I was actually in Cambodia when I started reading those, and so something just clicked, and I thought, well, what if we were in that position? And we were, able to defend ourselves at all as a first issue. Would we actually afford all these protections we have under our rules of war and humanitarian law to aliens? And what if we wouldn't? Yeah, And the question is, what if the consequence otherwise would be annihilation of the human species? So would we not reach for the ultimate weapon in the arsenal straight away to avoid that if we could not fight the aliens on a level playing field, as far as development is concerned? So that's what started me. I don't know why that book triggered it, because as I said, there's many other books who have that scenario, and
I
that's
wonder
why
if it might have had something to do with this beautiful way that he sets it up as a really clear logical progression in the abstract. Like if you just think about the nature of the universe, which is finite from a perspective of matter as far as we know, and you think about life as something that expands, then you naturally reach this conclusion that there's going to be competition between various forms of expanding life. And then you combine that with this insight that the universe seems to be quiet, and you can ask why. And so the dark forest theory, I'm sorry to be spoiling this, but people should read it anyway, is that maybe people are being quiet, maybe other species are being quiet because it's very dangerous to speak up. And that goes to your point about our reckless meti endeavors, just shouting about being here and sending out signals to see what happens before we have any plan on how to deal with the fallout. I guess that wasn't a question, but I did want to ask you about sci-fi in general, and just throw it open to, like, what narrative models of ETI do you think are the most important for us to consider from sci-fi? What do you think sci-fi tends to miss? And have you personally considered some potential alien cultures that you haven't seen in science fiction?
I'm not sure science fiction misses a lot these days. I mean, it's been, people have been writing for over 100 years, and it's with increasing sophistication, especially in the hard sci-fi. So there are the signal scenarios where nobody actually arrives, but you get the signal. Then you have the signal, like in Contact, a book by Carl Sagan, that the signal actually is a message which allows you to build something. And then you have direct contact. Then there are the invasion scenarios, and there are other scenarios where things go reasonably smoothly, like in the day the Earth stood still. At the end of the day, it goes well. Although at the beginning, of course, there's a major threat. But so I don't think, I haven't seen anything missing. That the one thing which I forget her name, an academic said in an article, the funny thing is that in all of those science fiction stories, in all of these universes, humans always have a sort of special position. Like it always kind of reverts back to us as the most important ones. And so that's the one, I think, in the context of the Culture series by Bain, where you need to come to a point of realizing that you're just one of the species, and nobody actually is required to treat you in a special way. So the whole Star Trek approach to that, of the humans always kind of coming out on top, that's probably not reality. But you have some approaches there. I think what science fiction does is it expands our imagination. And if many people who do SETI have said to me, it's like, of course, you started out as a science fiction nerd, and it's just you start thinking about what if something like that happened, and how would how would it go with us and them or whatever. And then as you grow up, you become a scientist, you become a sociologist. There are always ways of approaching that problem from your own discipline, where science fiction can actually give you quite interesting leads to think about. So it's not scientific, of course. Even hard science fiction is not necessarily scientific, because they very often play with scientific issues that have not been developed yet. But so I think the field covers the different scenarios that are relevant for my book. So it's of course, I had a selection there which just spoke to the principles I was looking at. But I think it's actually I don't think there's a particular hole in the story by science fiction.
Do you think the one of the biggest values is this exploration of the range of of kinds of consciousness. Something your book made me think about a lot is this, you call this idea network regulation density, of basically how controlling ETI civilization might be. Like, is it like the Romans where they conquer, but they allow the locals to basically have their own rules? Or is it more like a Chinese state where you take over Hong Kong and now, you're in charge of Hong Kong? Yeah. And at the one end, you paint kind of the lightest possible version of this would be like a non-aggression treaty that basically just acknowledges territory. And then in the middle, there would be some kind of like national structure, like a federal government and state governments. And then at the extreme, you would get like hive mind, where everybody is part of one big organization and it's like really rigorously integrated. Is that something sci-fi has helped you think about? And do you have any intuitions about like where beings might tend to fall on this scale, or what the sweet spot might be for our interaction?
Well,
yeah,
sorry.
Go ahead.
No, the simple answer to that is we don't know. So we're at the moment we're just speculating in alternatives. And so one thing which I found interesting is Orson Scott Wells' The Ender. I think it started out as a trilogy and then it's now quadrilogy or whatever you call that, or tetralogy.
People should read at least Ender's Game.
That's right.
It's short and it's really good.
Yeah, which is in a way an engagement with a totally alien species. But even there, the alien species is able to communicate with humans. So these stories don't really work if you never have communication. Yeah, so they don't go very far.
You need it as a narrative device, but as you point out in the book, this might be harder than we think, given that we haven't even translated the Mayan texts that we still have.
Yeah,
we may have no way of getting to speak with them. Also, though, you mentioned, since you mentioned Ender's Game, it has this really interesting insight that a group of beings that live in maybe like a hive would have a really hard time, could potentially have a hard time recognizing our concept of individuality, recognizing individual humans as like sort of moral agents in the universe.
Yeah. That's exactly what I think one of the hive queens at the end says. It's like, how were we to know that you are actually kind of conscious beings, because you have no hive connection.
Yeah,
and that's had we known that, we would not have attacked you. So it's kind of this trap of not knowing what the other side is capable of, how they're thinking, and if you multiply that with interstellar distances, it becomes really, really difficult. Which is the thinking behind the Dark Forest theory of that. This person in the second volume that develops.
Yeah, and so the Dark Forest leads to this imperative that you sort of mentioned before, that sometimes we might have sort of morally perverse incentives to just destroy other civilizations as soon as we even realize they exist. Yeah. And you go into the book a little bit about how this kind of tests our humanitarian intuitions, because in a circumstance where we're like asymmetrically outgunned, we might be tempted to reach for an extreme solution, like essentially genocide or specieside, because we feel we have no other option. So I don't know, would you like to talk about how that has put some pressure on your understanding of humanitarian thinking at all? Like this imperative to prepare?
Yeah, I mean, in a sense, that situation would be so exceptional that the conclusions you can draw for interhuman relationships are fairly limited. The one thing I think I do in the book is talk about colonization scenarios where the colonizers bring a new disease which decimates the local population, and then the local population could, in theory, say, well, we can't live together with these people, even though we would like to, because they have a disease which we're not immune to, so we have to kill them all.
Yeah,
and make sure that they don't come here again, and we survive. So that's a kind of avoidance of annihilation aspect. So, but that, of course, never happened, because as we know, the people who come to a place are usually more advanced than the people who are there. So if you're able of crossing the ocean in the 1500s, then you're much more advanced than the native tribes that you will actually meet, also kind of weapons wise. So in that sense, the one thing which it brought out to me is, at the end of the day, if we are not able to counter any alien civilization that is hostile to us on a level playing field as we as we do between humans these days, then I'm pretty sure we would reach for the weapon that makes sure, beyond doubt, that there will be no annihilation or enslavement scenario, or gives us the best chance of avoiding such a scenario. And we would not have too many qualms about it, because after all, we're not doing too well how we treat other humans, but these would not even be humans. So the othering mechanism, the psychological othering mechanism that we apply to our human enemies, would apply tenfold to any alien enemy. And we just and then it's if it's your existence or their existence, then I think we'll be reaching the conclusion fairly quickly that if we have a weapon that makes sure that doesn't happen, we'll use it, especially if otherwise this civilization is more advanced than we are.
So we've covered some of the content now of your hostile contact and current law chapter. I just wanted to ping two more ideas. You mentioned that we shouldn't assume that they're friendly. I think that's obvious. But you also note, and maybe counterintuitively, that we shouldn't assume we're powerless even if they're highly advanced. Do you want to say anything about that?
Well, that's just, excuse me, that's just because we don't know how advanced they are. So they may be so super advanced that we're just like ants to humans. But there's no way of actually fighting back. But they may just be a little bit more advanced. So when I give talks about this topic, I always use this one image from District 9, where there's this spaceship that arrives over Johannesburg, which looks pretty clapped out, by any standards. I mean, have you seen the movie?
Yes.
Yeah. So you know what I'm talking about. So we're actually in the film, humans are able to break into the spaceship and actually help the aliens out. So they flew a long way. It may be something what you call a generation ship that's been flying through space for hundreds of years, and now they arrive and the whole thing is more or less decrepit. So if that's the scenario, then I think we would be in very good position to actually dictate terms and actually defend ourselves. Although at the end, of course, in that movie, they find this wonderful propulsion. I don't know what this fuel, whatever they have, and they just zoom away.
But people should watch that. It's a creative little exploration, and it's a different kind of sci-fi. Like, what if aliens were in trouble?
That's right. And so if it's one of those scenarios, then we might not necessarily reach for the big hammer right away, but the answer depends on how advanced are they, and if they dictate the terms, then there's no real point in arguing. And also, I'm aware that's also one of the consequences of the UAP scenario. That if the UAP scenario is actually accurate and real, and they are obviously are more advanced, but more advanced than hostile, for which we have kind of the evidence is a bit shaky on that. Then there won't be any negotiations where we have any capital to negotiate. So that's it. All of I said my book might be moot the minute somebody actually stops on the White House lawn and pops the hatch and says, "Here we are, and this is our conditions." So, but so far it hasn't happened. My book is still selling, so I'm happy.
I think it'll still be relevant, and I think we can breeze through the next section, preparing for hostile contact. The short story is, it's really hard. You mentioned this problem of the spherical defense. The farther away you get, like the bigger you want your perimeter to be, the more difficult it is to maintain. Time is a problem. Resources are a problem. Supplies, staff. Then you mentioned the problem that we've got this colonial drift politically, historically. So when you send powers far away from a home country, they tend to evolve their own sort of like political architecture. So that's a challenge as well. Is there anything else that? And then we mentioned that. We might need to change some of the UN rules to get any military infrastructure in space. And finally, you ping the problem that preparing these weapons at all might be fraught because we have this current competitive global circumstance. Is there anything I missed here that you want to dial in on more?
That's a very good summary. Yeah.
Okay, great. Well, then let's do 6, legal prolegomena of peaceful relationships with the ETI. It's kind of like your exploration of meta law a little bit. You're working from and the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights here. I think this is a beautiful part of your book. It's a fascinating exploration, and what's so cool about it is that you get so detailed. So you pick the ICCP because it is the closest thing we have to an international binding law. You mentioned that we have the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, but it's not legally binding. But 173 or 4 nations have now ratified the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights. And then there are additional 6 signatories who have not ratified it. This includes China, notably. They're somewhere in the middle. And it has a bunch of rules, and you chunk these rules into basically big buckets that you call recognition as a person before the law, self-determination and political activity, equality and minority rights, right to life, ban on cruel treatment, due process, right to liberty, freedom of movement, and privacy and family, and restriction of exercise of rights. And then you walk through all of these, and you talk about which ones might be negotiable or not when it comes to the possibility of creating like a treaty with a galactic federation, a galactic club that we would want access to. So I was thinking initially that we could walk through these one at a time and talk about what's non-negotiable and what's not, but maybe that's just too much. Would you like to approach this generally and make a comment about your project here?
Yeah, I mean, that's... as I said, there used to be an article before I got into the book there, and the idea is that all of these rights that the ICCPR sets out, they're moving from the very personal to the societal. So it's your own personal freedom, privacy, and then at some stages political activity and freedom from oppression, things like that. So it's moving from the person out towards society. And the idea is that there are certain rules about which we are very particular at the moment, which of course is your own personal integrity. That you're not meant to be attacked. Human dignity, as far as that's not really in the ICCPR. The German Constitution has an article on human dignity, which it's non-negotiable. So any kind of activity by the government that infringes your human dignity is by definition unconstitutional. And so I made a few examples there, and for example, the question of freedom of religion. If what if the alien said a religion is a lot of nonsense and it has this potential of creating differences and aggression between people. So if you want to join our club, religion needs to go by the board. Would we do that? So if you imagine the current situation, there are a few people who will probably have a big problem with that. So my favorite is actually the one where it gets really personal, and that is the situation that if you want to be a member of that network, one rule of the network is that every member species has to deliver a certain number of specimens of their own species to all other species for the purpose of conducting any kind of experiments on them, any kind, no questions asked. Consent of the specimens not required. So a violation of personal freedom, a violation on the rule against cruel and unusual treatment. Would we do that if the exchange would be, we're giving you technology which will allow you to basically clean up the Earth in the next 5 years. It will take care of all your energy problems, and it will allow you to start colonizing your own solar system within the next decade. So, question is, they say, well, we want 1,000, 1,000 specimens from each country on Earth.
Oof.
So that's about 170, 180,000 people delivered. The trade-off is, you get to clean up the Earth.
Go ahead.
So it's the typical kind of the Spock. The needs of the many outweigh the needs of the one or the few.
Yeah.
So and that's that's a classical philosophical problem.
Yeah. And you mentioned elsewhere in your book that legally we have a hard time encoding that. Like we prefer actually to protect human life. You mentioned this example of like whether it's legal to shoot down an airplane that might crash into a building, and we have decided that we would not want to shoot down the airplane in some of these.
Well, the German Constitutional Court did at the time, and I think the decision was wrong because there's people on the plane, there's people in the buildings.
Yeah,
lives are the same. So if the object is the same, and you have 20,000 on the ground and 150 on the plane, I think there's a fairly good ethical argument we made to shoot that plane down.
Yeah.
It's not like it's justification or anything, but it's the lesser evil at the end of the day. And if you're talking to the relatives of the people on the ground who get burned and all these in the towers like at 9/11, they won't have a lot of sympathy for that kind of argument.
Yeah. And actually, just to loop sci-fi back in, this is, I think, sort of a disservice that Star Trek has performed for us repeatedly, is that they pose these moral conundra and then they refuse to engage with them.
That's right.
The Kobayashi Maru being their sort of like go-to. Right. There's always a way to save everybody, but no, there are going to be circumstances where you have to make a tough decision. And I think that you raised a really interesting idea there about the volunteer or about the specimens. And my mind went to volunteers because there are lots of people. I would imagine if you ask the whole planet, there would be some number of people who said, yeah, I will go for scientific and international or interspecial purposes. But I think there is a hard number there somewhere. I don't know if it would be 1,000 per country. Are there 1,000 Moldovans who would want to sacrifice their bodies? People? I don't know.
It's not a question of voluntariness in the example I'm making. It's a question, is this required? And if you don't, then you're not joining the network.
Yeah, so you're asking a hard version of this question.
Yeah, so it's but as I say at the end of that chapter, we don't have any rule for that. And that's why, as you said it sometime earlier, we need to start thinking about it.
Well, that's a good place to start to tie a bow here. What do we need to start thinking about? What kind of plans should we be making? Who should be doing these plans? Like, does it have to happen at the international level, or do you think we should have some state protocols? Or should we be developing SETI reply protocols? Should we be developing like military plans that are public? What should happen now, and who should be doing this work?
All of the above. I mean, we can't just leave one thing out. We need to. The one thing which my book is about is we need to come to an understanding of what I call, or what Stephen J. Dick called a unilateral matter law. So as I say, I'm not a fan of the idea of a matter law, but a unilateral matter law, meaning a starting point, a point of departure on which all human civilization can agree. What are the basic building blocks of our ethical outlook on the world, and they may not always be the same as in the ICCPR, but there are things where we say that's where we draw the line. Political activity, maybe, religious freedom, maybe, but there are things like, for what I would see is this example of the specimens, where the reaction would be, hang on a minute, that's not really what we want, but who knows? We need to start working on this on a trans-civilizational human understanding of what our basic values are. And then you get to a point where we say, well, okay, if these are our values, then how do we defend them if we have to? And that moves then to the question of preparation for hostile contact, or even for benign contact. Who gets to talk for Earth? And that, in theory, should happen on an international level. And at the moment, the best institution that recommends itself for that is the United Nations. That being said, at the moment, the United Nations are, of course, being massively undermined by a number of countries that, to add insult to injury, are permanent members of the Security Council. China, Russia, the US, they're not really playing by the rules anymore. And so the question of how long the rule-based world order is still intact, as you and I got to know it when we grew up, it's a big question. So, but again, it's still on a theoretical level, it's still the best way to look at it, I think. And one of my favorite sayings that I've I have to apply quite a lot when I think about stuff like that. Is that the perfect is the enemy of the good? You do something even if it's not perfect, but you're not doing anything is not an option really. And then maybe adopt humanitarian rules that if we have a conflict, what will we be happy to use as our response if we can? But it's not something that is going to happen tomorrow, because at the moment the world really has different problems. But it's something which people need to think about, and there are enough people, both in the SETI and the UAP communities, that begin to see these issues. So it's not just about finding out what's flying around there, but what are the kind of the ultimate implications of finally making contact in a sense that's not hidden away somewhere in a military black box or things like that.
Yeah. It's interesting to me that you learned some things about your own intuitions about human law by exploring the potential application of our laws to interspecial relationships, and that made me think that it's not enough to have a project that just codifies our human intuitions about how we treat each other. We really need to go through the mental exercise of imagining engaging with a truly other kind of being to broaden our perspective and make these rules in a way that will actually meet the moment if and when we enter into communication with such beings.
Exactly.
Well, I think we pretty much did it, and we're coming in just about time. Is there anything that you would like to leave us with, put a gloss on, or return to before I let you return to your day?
Yeah, it's the one thing on the last topic is two colleagues of mine, Andreas Anton and John Elliott, and I, last year we started a global survey on questions like, among other things, on questions of what would people be willing to trade. We got about 6,500 responses that are actually valid and not bot responses or anything, and it's quite interesting to see what people what so far. I mean, we haven't done the analysis down to the detail yet, but the general trend seems to be that religion is one of the things that goes by the board quickly, and political activities. So all of the stuff that is further away from the individual seems to be dropped fairly easily. And we also, one of the other things which we looked at are people afraid of the idea that we're making contact, or are they excited? And the conventional wisdom in the community is that everybody's going to freak out. It's going to be pandemonium. Once the big starship appears over Washington or anywhere. And the funny thing is that so far we find that more people would say we're excited if this happens. It's kind of a crossover. Some people say excited, but I'm also worried. But there's many, many more people who feel excited about the idea that we're making contact. So Andreas Anton is going to present a paper on the preliminary outcomes of that survey at this conference on 24th of this month. So and you can follow it online. It's going to be streamed via Teams. So I'll send you the link afterwards.
And what is it called? It's
called Grounding the SETI and UAP Debate.
Okay, great. And is there a place where you like people to engage with your work online, or should they just read your book?
Just read the book. Send me an email. So I'm not a member of any kind of major center or institute or anything like that. So I'm more or less I'm a single combatant in this area with a few other single combatants joining me. But it's the network is really still in its beginnings, and there's a Society for UAP Studies which Mike Ciffone is starting, and you know him.
Yes.
But that's all of that is still getting off the ground. Other than the Society for the Coalition for Scientific Coalition for UFO Studies, which has been around a long time with Bob Powell, but there is that's not so much on the sociological side. So the SUAPS is much more on the social sciences side, where I think a lot of the work needs to be done. So there are issues or places where people can go and probably just Google UAP, and you'll probably find dozens or hundreds of sites, and then Yeah, but all these things are on my, if they want to go to my staff page at Durham Law School, there's the links to my lunatic fringe activity in SETI and UAP are all there.
That's great. Okay, well, we'll include that link with the show. And we're very grateful that you're out there waging this battle for us. I think you're leading a really interesting and exciting interdisciplinary approach here. And I'm very grateful for you sharing some of your time and your really creative and I think important thinking with us. So thank you so much for taking the time today, Michael. It was really an honor to meet you.
No, thank you. It was my pleasure. Thank you.
And that's the show. Thank you for watching or listening. If you'd like to subscribe to the show, you can do that on patreon.com/WTUFO or on YouTube or on Buzzsprout. You can support us for as much or as little per month as you would like to. We really appreciate anything that you can contribute. Also, you can check out Spacefare's shop at spacefare.etsy.com. Thank you again for watching or listening. I hope you have a beautiful day.